contest. And so we're going to look a little bit at how to actually run an online contest. We're going to look at a few things today. We're going to look at the basics, starting off what types of contests are we doing, when are we doing them, what kind of resources you need, who do you need to have on your team, what do you need to brief when you brief your contestants and your officials, what do you actually do before, during, and after the contest, and a few of the lessons we learned along the way this past spring. And finally, we'll have a list of references that you can check later on. Before we get into anything, let's have a look at the basics. So make sure we're all on the same page. This year, we're going to have the international speech and the evaluation contest, along with the corresponding contest in French. Club contests run from beginning of November to end of December. The area contests run from January till end of February. The division contests are going to run from March 5th to March 27th. And if you check the district calendar, you'll see the exact dates for all the division contests. It's all been populated. And finally, the District 61 contest will take place at the 2021 District Conference, and that's scheduled for April 14th and 17th. How long you should plan to have your contest, the duration, it depends. How many contests are you planning to do? How many participants do you have? If you're running all 4 of the contests, both languages, back to back on one day, potentially you're looking at a good 4 hours or even more. So just to be prepared for potentially a pretty long evening. TI has mandated that clubs can do their contests either in person, in accordance with all local laws and restrictions, or they do it online. In practice, most, if not all, clubs are going to end up doing their contests online this year. However, all area, division, and district level contests must be done online. So most, if not all, the contests at all levels are going to be online this year. So that's just a little bit of background to get us started. Let's look at some of the resources you need before you get started. And we're going to look at a few things. What kind of documents do you need? What do you need as far as the capabilities of your Zoom account? And also, you're going to need some form of back channel communication. And we're going to talk about that in more detail. Documents. The first and foremost you see here is, of course, the contest rulebook. That is by far the most important document you're going to use. Make sure that everybody from the chair all the way down to the contestants, all the officials, they've read the entire rule book, they're familiar with it. Make sure you have a copy of it on hand, and also check for updates because they do periodically update it throughout the year. And I would check it all the way up to the day of the contest to make sure you have the latest and greatest. Other resources, there's going to be a more complete list at the end, but there is a District 61 contest resource page at the TMB 61 site. That has pretty much every type of document you can think of, as ballots, forms, the scripts to read that the contest chairs will use, the briefing scripts. Pretty much every document you need to run a contest, whether online or in person, is at that tmb61.com site. So make sure to check that out. And TI has their own contest repository as well at this link here. And finally, there's another document here called Best Practices for Online Speech Contests. That's something that TI published this past spring, and it has a bit more detail than what we're going to use here. But you can check that document out at this link and look through some of the best practices they have there. So those are just a few reference documents you want to check out before you get started. Which brings us to the Zoom account. And there's other platforms you can use. You can use Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, and so on. But for the sake of this discussion, we'll limit ourselves to just Zoom. What do you need to have with your Zoom account? Well, we recommend that you have a paid account because if you use the free version, you have a number of limitations. You're limited to just 40 minutes. You can't create breakout rooms. You can't use any of the other advanced features. So I would suggest using the paid version of Zoom in order to run your contest. And in that Zoom account, you're going to create your contest area and you're going to have at least 5 breakout rooms. And the breakout room is just a private meeting area. That's what we're in right now. And that's in addition to the main Zoom area that we sometimes call the lobby, for example. And so the place we were in before we got moved, that would be the...
my speakers because I got my iPad. I couldn't use my phone.
Oh, okay. No problem. And so the place that we were at before we got moved here, that would be the lobby for this meeting. So you're going to have a main Zoom area lobby for your contest, and then you'll have these 5 breakout rooms. And we'll go through on each one quickly. So the first one is the actual contest room. That's sometimes...
Is the lobby the same as the waiting room?
Not exactly. The waiting room is sort of an area that all the people that join a meeting wait before they go into the meeting, and they'll say, wait for the host to let you in. Once the host lets them in, now they're in the lobby area. And from the lobby area, then they go to the separate breakout rooms. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So you want to create at least 5 breakout rooms. You can create many more than that. I would suggest creating a couple extra ones. You never know when you might need them. You have the main contest room. That's where all the audience members sit. That's where you have the speeches and everything else. There's the contestant holding room. That's where you do briefings for the contestants. That's where you sequester contestants if they ask to be sequestered, or that's where you hold them if you're doing an evaluation contest. Number 3 is your judge holding room. And that's where brief the judges, and that's where you hold the judges while they wait to count their ballots. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. The ballot counting room is just what it sounds like. That's where you actually count the ballots. And finally, there is what we call a small conference room. It's sort of a private discussion area. If, for example, the officials need to have a private conversation, or the Zoom team needs to have a private chat, you can just move them there. They can have their conversation. When they're done, they move back. So you need a paid Zoom account, at least 5 breakout rooms. You can create more if you want, and that should give you everything you need to actually host a contest. So I mentioned the back channel communications, and one of the things we used this past spring during division and district contest is a couple of different back channel methods. For example, we had a voice communication channel, which is actually just a conference call that we used. So we had our phones up with a conference call that we'd speak to each other over this conference line to coordinate the movements. And there was also a text or a chat back channel. And we used Slack, but you can use pretty much any group text or group chat application that you like. And just a way to communicate with each other over the chat line. And it's there for a few reasons. First is because you don't want to inadvertently say or share something over Zoom, especially if you're dealing with judge information or rankings or any other sensitive information. By having this independent back channel completely isolated from Zoom, there's no chance that you'll inadvertently release something to the general public like that. And having the back channel, especially having the conference call line, it makes it a lot easier to coordinate all the movements. So the Zoom team can say, okay, contestant number 2 is ready to move. Judge number 2 is ready to count their ballot. You coordinate all that using the voice channel. And because it's independent, if something catastrophic happens with a Zoom connection, you can still coordinate that through the back channel because the back channel is independent of Zoom. So I definitely recommend having the voice channel as well as a couple of chat channels. One point at the bottom of the screen here, for the group texting or group application, you want to have 2 separate channels because you don't want the contestants interacting with the judges. You don't want the contestants knowing who the judges are. So the judges, they get their own separate text channel along with the timers and ballot counters. And then there's another channel for the contestants, the sergeant at arms, and the chair. So voice channel, 2 separate text or group chat back channels. And you can practice using them as you go along. Now let's look at who you want to have on your team. And you have the contest officials and you have the Zoom tech team. The contest officials, it's pretty much the same as what you would have for an ordinary in-person contest. And the rule book has all the details you need to know as far as the judges, how many judges do you need, what are the eligibility requirements. It covers all that in pretty good detail, and it's pretty much the same thing for an online contest. We recommend that you have 2 sergeant at arms. You're going to need 1 sergeant at arm that stays in the main contest breakout room, and then another sergeant at arm is going to be in the breakout rooms anytime you're sequestering contestants or if you're counting ballots. If you don't have enough people to have a second sergeant at arms, then one of the Zoom co-hosts can double up as that role because you're going to have a Zoom co-host in the breakout room anyway. So if necessary, they can act as a sergeant at arms. We're going to have 2 timers, and only one of them is going to be visible at any given time. And the primary timer is going to have their camera on. They're going to display the timing cards, or if they have it, they're going to display the virtual backgrounds to display green, yellow, or red as the case may be. And so only one is going to be visible. If they have an issue with their timing backgrounds or their connection, then secondary timer, they switch on their video and they are now the primary timer. So pretty similar to an in-person contest. You have your contest officials, you have 2 SAAs, 2 timers. Talking about the Zoom technical team itself, you're going to have a Zoom host and at least 2 Zoom co-hosts, preferably more. A Zoom host has certain powers that the co-hosts don't. The host can open the meeting, they can open the breakout rooms, they can move people from one breakout room to the other. Whereas the Zoom co-hosts, they have a more limited capability. They can monitor the cameras and the microphones, they can rename people, they can switch off the video feeds, and they can move themselves from one breakout room to the other, but a co-host cannot move another person. And so the way it works is the Zoom host moves everybody and the Zoom co-hosts coordinate that movement. There'll be a co-host in the breakout room saying, okay, contestant number 2 is ready to be moved, and the Zoom host moves contestant number 2. And make sure that all the hosts and co-hosts know what they're doing and when, and make sure that they're comfortable with the features so they don't have to sort of explain to each official or each co-host along the way, okay, this is how you do this and this is how you do that. And so make sure that they practice it beforehand and get familiar with it. Now, all right, so that's your team. Let's talk about some of the things you're going to brief in an online contest. And this is sort of in addition to the regular briefing points that you would get from the scripts on the tmb61.com. So in addition to all the usual statements about eligibility, originality, and so on, there's a few points we want to look at. I'm going to give a few pointers for the contestants and the officials, a few general points, and then we're going to look at some more detailed areas that you want to brief for the contestants and the officials that are unique to an online contest. So let's look at this diagram here. This is actually a diagram that Danielle Riendo, who is doing the French session right now, created for this, this presentation, and he was kind enough to let me borrow his diagram for you. And I thought it was a really good way to visualize what the breakout rooms look like. So on the left, you have the lobby. That's sort of the main area. And here's the Zoom contest room. And you can see it's starting to fill in. There's a few audience members in the light gray. The icon here with the dark gray and the sunglasses, that's your Zoom hosts, or the Zoom ninjas, as we like to call them. Then you have the judge holding room, and you have one of the briefings underway here. So you have the chief judge briefing the ballot counters, the judges, and the timers, and you have a Zoom co-host waiting with them. In the contestant holding room, breakout room, you have the chair doing the briefing for the contestants. And that's sort of what the briefing looks like. So you have 2 separate briefings, and the only difference is that for an online contest, you have the briefings in a breakout room. General briefing points. There is a few things you want to brief the people. Make sure everybody, whether they're a contestant or an official, they know how to rename themselves like we did at the start of this meeting. It makes it a lot easier for the Zoom team, so they don't have to go renaming everybody. Make sure that the judges know, do not rename themselves. You don't want the judges to say judge or bracket judge or anything in front of their names, because the point is you don't want the judges to be revealing their identities to anybody. So they just leave their name as is. They're sort of hiding in plain sight among the audience members. For an evaluation contest, there's a couple ways you can do that. You may recall that normally for an evaluation contest, the target speaker, or the test speaker, we sometimes call them, they kind of remain anonymous. They don't advertise the fact that they're a test speaker until they actually get called up to speak. So there's 2 things that the test speaker can do. They can either immediately rename themselves to just target speaker, no name, and then switch off their camera as soon as they log into the meeting. And that way their camera is off until they're introduced. Or they can just do what the judges do. They just don't do anything with their name. They don't indicate that they're a speaker or not a contestant or anything else. And they just keep their identity like an ordinary audience member until they're called to speak. Probably it's easier to go with option number 2, just tell them don't do anything, but make sure the target speaker knows what to do and that they're clear on what to do or what not to do with their names. Make sure that the audience members, the contestants, and the officials, they know how to do a few basic Zoom functions. For example, hide non-video participants. This way, once everybody switches off their cameras, you don't have a very cluttered screen, and you can just see the person who has their cameras on. Make sure they know how to pin the timer and how to switch between gallery and speaker view. And also, of course, make sure everybody knows how to mute their microphones. If not, the Zoom team will do it for them. Make sure that nobody touches the breakout room controls, because if you touch leave breakout room or something, it sends you back to the main room, and then the Zoom team has to go grab them and send them back. So the Zoom team is going to handle all the movements. Make sure that everybody knows, don't touch anything as far as the breakout room controls. And at the start of the contest, make sure that everybody knows when to have their cameras on and when to have it off. Rule of thumb is, once the contestant's introduced, everybody switches off their camera except for the contestant, the chair, and the timer. And then once the chair is done introducing, the chair also switches off their camera. And when a contestant is speaking, the only cameras that you're going to have on are the contestant and the timer. So those are a few separate briefing points you want to cover for everybody. So make sure they know how to rename themselves, make sure they know how to do a few basic functions in Zoom, and make sure everybody knows when to switch off their camera. Now we're going to move into some of the more detailed points. And these are specific to an online contest, and it's kind of based on the briefings we gave during the district contest this past spring. So we're going to talk about, how do you determine the speaking area for an online contest? What do you do with the camera? What do you do once you determine the speaking order? How do you grade eye contact in an online contest? How do you judge audience perception or audience reaction when all the audience members have their cameras switched off? How do you actually count the ballots? What do the timers do specifically? And finally, how do you arrange for contestants to test out their audio and video systems? Let's go through the list. Speaking area. On the right here, you see a picture that was distributed by TI, and you can see the link at the bottom of the screen. And this shows sort of the ideal speaking area for an online contest. You want someone who is going to be close enough to the camera that they can see their facial expressions, see their gestures, and also that they're close enough that their voice can be clearly heard by the audience members. And as we'll see in a moment, the actual speaking area may vary from one contest to the other, but make sure that contestants are aware that the speaking area potentially may be very limited, and be prepared for a range of speaking areas. But there's more details here at this link. And that brings us to the fun part. This, I remember, generated quite a bit of discussion at the district contest, and it was a directive that came out from TI back in April. And it said that in order to ensure fairness among all the contestants, we're going to use a standard speaking area that applies to all the contestants within a contest. And that speaking area is going to be determined by the limitations of the audio video setup of the contestant with the most restricted setup. And what that means is, if you have one contestant that has a wireless headset that lets them maneuver around the room, another contestant has a corded headset that only has a 3-foot cord on it, that means everybody is now limited to 3 feet. And the idea is that you don't want someone to have an unfair advantage just because they have a more advanced setup that gives them more room to move around their room. So make sure that contestants are aware in advance that, yes, you may have a very limited speaking area. We won't know for sure until we actually do the briefings and actually get everybody together and test out their connections. But potentially they may have a limited speaking area. And so be prepared accordingly. And during the briefings, the way you determine the speaking area is you go one contestant at a time, ask them, okay, move as far back as you can from your computer and go as far side to side as you can within the limits of your setup. And take note for each contestant, they can move 3 feet back or 5 feet back or 4 feet side to side. Make note for each contestant. Once you're done, go through the list and see who had the most restricted maneuvering area, and that is now the standard speaking area for all contestants. And once you're done with this, communicate this to the chair and the chief judge, because the judges are going to be taking this into account when they do their judging. And also remind the contestants to mark off this area on their floor. They can put, a piece of masking tape or put something on the floor to mark off the speaking area. And another question that came up along the way is, are they disqualified if they move out of the speaking area? And the answer that TI gave is no, they are not disqualified if they move out of the speaking area. However, the judges may deduct points as they would for a regular contest. And the contestant can only be disqualified automatically on the basis of eligibility, originality, or a timing infraction. Or if you get up to the region quarterfinals level, if your video doesn't meet certain criteria, they can be disqualified for that as well. But at the area or division level, you won't be disqualified if you move out of the designated speaking area. So that's probably going to be the thing that generates the most discussion among your contestants. So make sure you're comfortable briefing this. And if you have any questions, talk to the contest team for that. So there's a standard speaking area. It's determined by the limitations of the most limited setup among the contestants. Make sure that the contestants are prepared for this, and make sure to make the judges aware of this as well. Camera, pretty simple. There is no panning, no zooming, no special effects, no Instagram filters, anything like that. And during the briefing, you can, however, adjust the lighting and the camera settings to make sure their facial expressions are as clearly visible as possible. But once you're done with all the settings, you don't adjust the camera during the speech. So nothing too complicated there. Speaking order, you determine same way you would a regular contest. You can do the classic, pick a strip of paper with a letter on one side and a number on the other side. That's your speaking order. Use whatever method you feel suitable to determine the speaking order. And once you're done that, do a couple things. For international speech, ask if any contestants want to be sequestered, and if yes, notify the Zoom host. And also notify the Zoom host of the speaking area so they know who to move and when during the contest. And just confirm that that information has been received so everybody knows who's moving when. Eye contact. So for an online contest, eye contact is considered looking at the screen. So, or looking at the camera rather. So right now I'm looking at the camera, that's eye contact. Looking at the screen, like I'm doing now, that is not eye contact. And so this is eye contact, this is not. And it's not a natural thing. It's very tempting to look at the screen, especially if there's people on your screen. And this is actually one of the reasons why we encourage everybody to shut their cameras off, except for the timer and the speaker. Because if you have a bunch of audience members staring back at you, there's a very strong temptation to look at those audience members and look away from the camera. And so by having all the cameras off except the timer, it makes it a lot easier for the contestant to focus their attention on the camera and maintain that eye contact. And the other one, which generated a bit of discussion, was audience reception. And if you've ever judged a contest, you may recall there's a section on the forum that talks about audience reception. Sometimes they call it audience reaction, which is basically what effect does a speech have on the audience? And the question came up, well, how do you judge that when everybody has their cameras off? And the guidance we receive is that for an online contest, the judge themselves is a de facto member of the audience. And so the judge is supposed to use their own reaction as the audience reception criteria when they're judging the contestant. It's not ideal, it is a limitation, but that's pretty much the only thing you can do under the circumstances. So as far as the audience reception judging criteria, the judge is the audience. And that's what they need to do when they fill out their forms. So just make that clear for your judges when you do the briefings.
Sorry, could you please clarify the last point again? So is this related to engagement, audience engagement?
Yeah, audience engagement or audience reception, as a few, whatever term they use on the forum, there's a section on the forum where they talk about how did the audience react to it? What impact did it have on the audience around them? And when you're in the physical contest, you can just look around the audience to see what they're doing as far as the reactions. Are they laughing? Are they shocked or what? But in an online contest, because everybody has their cameras off, then the judge needs to use their own reaction to judge the audience engagement or the audience reaction. And so if it affects the judge, that gives some indication of how the others are reacting. But that's pretty much the only thing you can do under the circumstances, is use your own reaction as a judge to fill in the audience reception or audience reaction engagement section on the forum.
So just a follow-up question, we have to keep this criterion. We can't kind of not include it if it doesn't work online as well.
Well, you have to use the judging forms, and the judging ballots include this. And unless they update the judging ballots to remove that criteria, you still have to take that into account when they do the final score. So we just have to go with the forms as they stand now. Which brings us to points for the judges and ballot counters. So once again, judges don't rename themselves. And the way you're going to count the ballots, and I'll go into more detail in just a bit, the judges are going to move into a judge holding area and then the actual judge ballot counting room. They're going to take their ballots, and as you see here, they're going to take the ballots, they're going to fold it over so only the bottom part with the actual rankings is visible. They're going to actually hold it up to the camera, and then the ballot counters are going to take a screenshot, or they're just going to record what they see here, first, second, third place, and that's how you record the judging results. So the judge fills in the ballot as they would normally. They sign it, hold it up to the camera, ballot counters record the results. The other way you can do it, there is a fillable PDF version of the ballot, and the judges can just type in the results there and just share their screen to the ballot counters inside the ballot counting room. And make sure the judges know how to do this, because it really slows things down if you have to explain to each judge one after the other, okay, this is what you clicked to share your screen. But we're going to talk about that on Thursday. Once the judges are done showing their ballots, remind them to switch their video back off before they go back to the main contest room, because if they have the video on, as soon as they go in the main contest room, they're going to pop up on the middle of the screen, and everybody's going to know, hey, that person was a judge, and they just got back in the judging room. But if they have their cameras off, it makes it a lot easier to make a discrete entry back into the judging room without anybody noticing, or back into the main contest room. So pretty simple. Fill out the ballots, show it to the camera, then cameras off, and back to the main room. Timers, as I mentioned before, we have 2 timers, and both are tracking the time, but only one is visible. And the primary timer has their video on, and they signal the time. They're using the virtual backgrounds, which is the ideal. If not, you can just use physical timing cards like you would normally. If you do use the regular timing cards, the physical cards, make sure to actually write the word green, yellow, or red on the card, because one thing we discovered early on is that sometimes the colors don't really show that well on the camera. And so it might be a little hard to tell, is that green or is that yellow, is that red? It may just look kind of like a grayish color sometimes. But if you actually write the word green, yellow, red on it, there's no doubt whatsoever that you're looking at the correct card. So either use the virtual backgrounds, or if you use a physical card, write the word on it. If you have a problem along the way, then the timer is going to notify the secondary timer via their private chat channel, who then switches on their own video, and they take over the timing from that point on. And along the way, as usual, if you have a discrepancy in the times between the 2 timers, and it shows that one contestant is just under the limit, the other one is just over the limit. You know, one timer shows 7:29, the other one shows 7:31. You just go with whatever result works in the contestant's favor. So just a few general points about timing. You want to give the contestants a chance to check their audio video the day of the contest. And so we recommend opening up the room, say 30 minutes or an hour beforehand. And that way, if a contestant wants to do a sound check, they can just type it into their chat channel, say, hey, I'd like to test my camera. The Zoom co-host goes with them to one of the open breakout rooms. They test out their camera. Once everything's good, they go back and they're ready to go. So make sure to give that service to the contestants if they want it. All right, that's a few points about the briefing. Let's get into the fun stuff, the procedures. And what we're doing here is based on the procedure that Amy Campbell put together. She was the Division B director at the time, and now she's our club growth director. And she put together this procedure for the division and district contest, and we've adapted it to this year's contest as well. We're to look at what do you do before the contest, during the contest, how do you actually count the ballots, and what do you do after the contest. So before, make sure that everybody is registered for their respective back channels, whether it's the voice channel for the Zoom team and the various text back channels for the various roles. Make sure the tech team and the contest officials actually talk to each other directly so everybody knows who's doing what. And we strongly suggest having a complete practice dry run for each set of groups. So you want to have separate sessions for contestants, chair, and sergeant at arms, and then another one for judges, ballot counters, and timers. And again, the idea is you don't want the judges and the contestants to be in the same practice session, so we don't know that way we don't know who the judges are. And the day of the contest, again, do your audio video check, do the briefings in those separate breakout rooms like we talked about before. And here comes another interesting part. At the link you see at the bottom of the screen, there is a little legal disclaimer that TI suggests that you display before having an online contest. It's just a disclaimer saying that because it's an online platform, nobody's going to sue TI in case someone uses their image. And from the text, you can see it's more for area, division, or district contests. But if you want, you can put something similar for a club contest. I would suggest just put a slide up in the main lobby area with this text on it, and then that way everybody sees it before they get moved into the contest room. But it's a little legal disclaimer, and all the details are here at this link at the bottom. All right, let's see how we actually do the contest itself, and look at international speech and evaluation. So international speech. So you call the meeting, the contest to order as usual. The chair does the explanation of the rules, eligibility, ask the chief judge, have all the judges been briefed? Yes. And then the timer demonstrates the timing procedures. They remind the audience when you can have your camera on or not. And again, the rule of thumb is the only time you should have your camera on as an audience member is to applaud after the speeches. Otherwise, keep the cameras off. And another point is, we'd like to ask the audience members not to comment on the speeches in the Zoom chat, because this is something that potentially could influence the judge. And so make sure the audience members know, don't say, oh, this is the best one of all, this is the greatest speech ever, because that, again, it could influence the judges. So the same way that we tell audience members to remain silent between each speaker, we ask the audience members to remain silent on the chat as well during the online contest.
Is there a way to disable
yeah, go ahead.
The chat option? Is there a way to disable the
I believe there is, and that's something we can look at on Thursday. And I know we left the chat on during division and district contests, but I believe that yes, there is a way to disable it. So if you want to disable the chat, you have that option. And of course, any contestants for international speech, if anyone wanted to be sequestered, this is when you would move them into the one of the holding rooms before you start the first speech. And so here is Danielle's illustration again, and you can see this is sort of what it looks like at the start of the contest. You have all the audience members there, you got the Zoom team ninjas there, and you have the chair, chief judge, and the various audience members. And unless someone asks to be sequestered, all the other breakout rooms are going to be empty at this point. So for each speaker, you want to make sure everybody's camera is off except for the chair, the contestant, and the timer. You ask the contestant, are you ready? And this is to ensure, one, are they ready? And also to ensure they're not inadvertently on mute. And so if you can hear them say ready, you know they're good to go. You do the introduction as chair, same as a regular contest, the name, title, name. And after the introduction is done, the chair switches off their camera. So the only cameras you want to have on during the speech are the speaker themselves and the timer. And if anybody else opens the video, the Zoom team is going to switch them off immediately. We're not going to ask anybody to switch it off. You just switch it off. Don't wait for permission. Same way that no one goes in or out of a room during a physical speech. During the online contest, you will not admit anyone from the lobby to the main room while the speaker is underway, because once someone goes into the main room, their image pops up on the screen. So make sure that you wait until the break to admit anyone who's waiting in the lobby. When you're done with each speaker, they call for 1 minute to give the judges time to fill their ballots. They invite the audience to turn on their cameras for about 10 seconds or so to applaud, do the jazz hands routine, then cameras off again before 1 minute. And during that 1 minute, they'll get the next speaker ready to go. And after which you repeat the process until you've gone through all the speakers. Right? So let's see how this looks like graphically using Danielle's illustrations here. So for the sake of the illustration, if it's a plain white square, it just means the camera is off. If it's a colored square, it means the camera is on. So at this point, the only cameras you see are the chair, the contestant, and the primary timer. The chair does the introduction, at which point chair turns off their camera. Only cameras on are the contestant and the timer. They do their 5 to 7 minute speech, after which everybody turns on their cameras, applauds for 10 seconds, and the judges get 1 minute to fill the ballots. And after that, cameras off, speaker number 2 is ready to go, and they repeat the whole process. So pretty straightforward, and once you practice it a few times, it's really not that difficult. And, now let's look at how you actually count the ballots. So at the end of the last speech, the chair will say, the audience, please remain silent. You can turn your cameras on if you like, but make sure the mics are off, and the judges get as much time as they need to fill their ballots, just like a regular contest. And the first thing you're going to do is the Zoom team is going to move the timers and the ballot counters to the ballot counting room, along with the chief judge and one of the Zoom co-hosts to assist with any technical issues. And the timers, they hold their timing sheets up to the camera, just like a judge would. So record the times. Once the chief judge is happy with the results, the timers go back to the main room. And while all this is going on, they get ready to move the judges to the judge holding room. And for each judge, as they complete their ballot, they go into their back channel. They'll say ballot ready, ballot up, whatever signal they want to use to signal that their ballot is good to go and they're ready to get moved. They move all the judges to the judge holding room. If the judges forget to write ballot up or ballot ready, don't worry about it. Just move everybody to the judge holding room anyways. They can fill out their ballots there. Once all the judges have been moved out of the contest room, then the Zoom host inside the main room announces, okay, the judges are all out, you can proceed with the contestant interviews. And when you do the interviews, you want everybody to switch off their cameras except the chair and the people being interviewed. That way it makes it a lot easier to pick out the contestants on the screen. So meanwhile, as this is going on, the judges are waiting in the holding room, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's just a holding area while they wait their turn to display their ballot. And in the ballot counting room, they bring each judge in one at a time. They do the whole routine where each judge shows their ballot to the camera, make sure to sign it, put the first, second, third place winner. Once they're done and the ballot counters are satisfied, yeah, Alex, go ahead. So you raise your hand.
Yes, I did. I had a question about the co-hosts.
Yep.
So once all of the judges have been moved back in, do the co-hosts, do they stay there as kind of like the security guard, or do they?
Yeah, so once all the judges are out of the main room, you're going to have a co-host in the counting room and a co-host with the judges in the ballot room. So the idea is you don't want to have anybody in a room without a co-host with them. So yeah, so the judges go into one at a time into the ballot counting room. They show their folded over form, or they share their screen. Once the ballot counters are happy, then the Zoom co-host inside the ballot counting room says, okay, judge number one is ready to go. And then once they've repeated this process and all the judges are done and they're back in the main room, at that point, the Zoom co-host in the main room switches on their mic and they announce, okay, all the judges are back. We can proceed to the next phase of the contest. And once the results have been tabulated, then you send it to the contest chair. And so this is basically what it looks like. So they're busy interviewing the contestant here. The timers go into the ballot counting room. Judges waiting in the judge holding room. Once the timers are done, they're back in the main room. Judge number one moves in, shows the ballot. Judge goes back in, camera off. Judge number two goes in, shows her ballot, and they go back. And the third judge, fourth judge, fifth judge. And FYI, for an area contest, remember, you've got to have at least 7 judges. So consult the actual contest rule book. But just for the sake of this illustration, we're just showing 5 judges. And once that's done, you announce that, okay, judges are all out. We can continue with the contest. Everybody moves back to the main room, and we can applaud or do whatever we need to do to move to the next phase. So that is the international speech contest procedure and the ballot counting procedure. And evaluation contest, it's a little bit different, but we do the same introduction, explain the rules, eligibility, demonstrate the timing, ask the chief judge, are all the judges been briefed and ready to go? Yes. And then the contest chair will introduce the target speaker, and ideally this should be the first time that anybody knows who the target speaker is. Target speaker comes up, they start their speech 5 to 7 minutes, and after the target speaker is done, all the contestants are moved to a holding area, and you want with them an SAA in the breakout room or a Zoom co-host who can be with the contestant. And normally what happens in an evaluation contest, they get 5 minutes to write their notes and remind them, don't communicate or share their screen or anything like that. And the 5 minutes needs to be timed by the SAA or a Zoom co-host inside the holding room, because they're not going to see the timing going on in the main room. So make sure someone is in the holding room to time the 5 minutes. Once that's up, they stop writing, and the contestants will then have to keep their hands visible. Now, this is sort of an awkward way to do it, but it's the only way you can do it online. Normally what happens for evaluation contests, they get 5 minutes, then the SAA comes around, collects all the notes to make sure they stop writing. Online contests, the next best thing is to get everybody to keep their hands up, visible, to make sure they're not adding any more notes. And the Zoom co-host will then inform the chair 5 minutes is up, and you can go ahead and call the first contestant in. And while they're doing that 5-minute writing period, usually the co-host is just interviewing the contestant to kind of kill a bit of time while they wait for the contestants to do their notes. Contestant comes in, 2 to 3 minutes, everybody's video off except the contestant. And once they're done, 1 minute during which the audience can applaud briefly. The Zoom co-host says, okay, contestant number 2, you're about to get moved. And then the next speaker goes into the contest room, turn their video on, and they repeat until the last speaker. Okay. And this is pretty much what it looks like here. So the chair has her video on, target speaker has video on, everybody's video is off. Introduction, chair turns off their camera, test speaker is done, everybody applauds. All the contestants move out. They do the interview with the target speaker, and while this is going on, they get 5 minutes in the holding room, timed by the Zoom co-host. Once that's done, the Zoom co-host says, okay, 5 minutes is up. And everybody applauds the test speaker. First contestant moves in, they give their presentation. Everybody applauds the contestant. Next contestant goes in, and that's pretty much all there is. You just repeat that until the last contestant is done. And once the last speaker is finished, you proceed with the timing and judging results, just like we did for the international speech. And you then communicate the results to the next level up. And if you have any other documents, the bio forms, anything else, you send that as well, just like you would for a regular contest. All right. So that's the procedure, and we'll wrap up with a few last-minute tips. So a few do's and don'ts. The conference channel, as we mentioned, is definitely the best way to do that real-time communication. If you're typing something on the chat, maybe a couple minutes before someone gets to actually check the chat. So for the Zoom host, definitely do all the real-time stuff using the conference call number. For the love of God, if you're a Zoom team member, make sure your Zoom microphone is muted when you're talking on the conference call. I learned that the hard way myself when I found myself talking for a couple of minutes, and I didn't realize until I checked the chat a couple of minutes later, say, shut off your microphone, Michel. So make sure it's muted unless you're announcing something to one of the breakout rooms. Have the practice sessions, including all the steps. Consult all the stakeholders anytime you update something. Have a written procedure. Make sure you follow the whole thing. And make sure to have a separate Zoom team doing the technical stuff. Don't have the chair or the chief judge try to do breakout room moves or anything like that. And if you have enough people, by all means, have one Zoom host, co-host dedicated specifically to monitoring the microphones and video. Right. Next, as we said, there's going to be a part 2. We talked about what to do today, and on Thursday, we're going to talk about how to do it, and the link is at the bottom. Here are all the contacts we have here if you need more information. Area directors, make sure to talk with your clubs to make sure they're ready to go. And a few more random documents here. So all the rule book, the speech exceptions. If you want to try out the Zoom backgrounds, they're at this link here from toastmasters.org. And that's pretty much everything you need to actually run the contest. But once you practice it a few times, it's actually not that hard. That's one of the reasons why we suggest to do a practice run, because you don't want the contest day to be the first time you attempt something. So once you practice it, you'll find that it becomes a lot more intuitive. So definitely it's very doable.
Michel?
Yep.
Why do you need a lobby plus a main contest room?
The lobby area is to prevent someone from just logging directly into the contest room. If you have someone that joins the meeting, you want to make sure that they can't just click the link and then get admitted straight into the contest room. And so having the lobby area is sort of an extra layer to isolate the contestants.
So the lobby is the first place any participants will enter. It's like the main room.
Yeah, that's where we were before we got into the breakout room here. So it's just to make sure that nobody pops into the contest room during a speech.
That makes sense.
Yep.
When a speaker finishes the talk, do they stay in the contest?
Yep. So once they're done, they can stay there the rest of the time, just like you would in a regular contest.